Well, good morning and welcome to the author spotlight of Don't Ditch That Text. We have Dr. Angie Ridgway and Nate Ridgway here with us today. So we're excited to hear what they have to say. So real quick, just to do a quick introduction, Dr. Ridgway, she began her career in middle and high school teaching Spanish. Yay, that was my background also. She's now working as with future secondary teachers and new faculty members at the University of Indianapolis, and her passion lies in supporting new teachers in the implementation of original pedagogies that strive to meet all students' needs. She has authored 4 books, most recently, Don't Ditch That Text, Differentiation in a Digital World. She holds a Master's of Education and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction, with areas of emphasis on secondary education and Spanish. She was the University of Indianapolis Teacher of the Year for 2020. And Nate is a tech-loving history teacher from Avon, Indiana, and co-author of Don't Ditch That Tech, Differentiation in a Digital World. He specializes in lesson design and differentiation and is also a licensed in history, education, and mild interventions. He was the Indiana Connected Educator of the Year in 2020, and his work has been featured in publications like the New York Times and the Washington Post. He has a master's degree in history from the University of Indianapolis. So we welcome our speakers today. A couple of little business things to think about is that closed captioning is available through Zoom. If you have those controls, you can turn on a live transcript if you see more, if you want that. If you want to turn it off, it's already on, you may adjust that to help you out. We ask that you use our Whova platform to chat and ask questions as we go through, and that way it'll be recorded for people to follow when they check in on these sessions later. And after the session, and I'll remind you of this, there's a link in the session description that has the session evaluation, and that'll trigger your form, your PGP certificates. So for those of you who are interested in acquiring those. As you're going today, don't forget to get involved and be social on social media. You can tag our presenters, you can tag Keep Indiana Learning, and use that hashtag virtually different. So without further ado, I will step aside and I'm going to turn the stage over to Dr. Ridgway and Nate Ridgway.
Thank you for having us here, Diana. We wanted to see if our participants might be willing to introduce themselves so we know who you are and what your interest is in our work. Can we start with Jordan?
I'm Teresa Lynn Wise, and I'm with Clay Community Schools. I know Diana, who introduced you, and I am interested in anything that involves technology.
Hi, Teresa. I'm originally from Terre Haute, so I certainly know where your schools are.
Very good. Yes.
Nice to meet you. What do you teach?
Well, right now I am actually the media specialist at North Clay Middle School and Northview High School in Brazil.
Excellent. Very good. Welcome to our author spotlight. Is there a particular topic you would like for us to talk about?
No, I think that anything that you have on your mind to discuss is probably going to be very beneficial.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Who else is here? How about Lisa Carroll? Lisa, are you willing to open your camera?
I actually can't open my camera, but I can unmute myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Lisa Carroll. I teach French at Carmel High School in Central Indiana. And I also serve as a building instructional technology coach. And so I'm just looking for some extra strategies of using tech in the classroom and how to best support the staff at our school.
Excellent. So you're there with one of our graduates, Josh Payne.
Yes.
He was one of my first student teachers at UND. Very good.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
How about Ben Bauman? Well, maybe Ben can't hear us. How about Kelly Hudson?
I'm Kelly Hudson. I'm an innovation coach at DeKalb Central Schools, which is just a little bit north of Fort Wayne in Indiana. So I serve as a technology integration coach and special education instructional coach. So those two topics seem to fit well with this description. So I was just curious about it. So
Excellent. Very good. And how about Ben? Can you hear us, Ben?
Or Jordan. We haven't heard from Jordan yet.
So Ben says he can hear, but he has a microphone hiccup. So he told us that in the chat.
Okay, thanks. How about Jordan Walters?
Hey, I am Jordan Walters. I have actually studied under Dr. Ridgway at UND for the MAT program. I'm a German teacher at Plainfield High School, and I pretty much jumped into this because anytime I see the word differentiation, I always need help with that. And so anything involving tech is really great, especially with differentiation. So,
hey, thanks for joining us, Jordan. How you been?
Been really good. I've got my two kiddos running around behind me, so you might hear that if I talk. So
it's okay. We'd love to see them. Nate's kid will probably make an appearance too.
Yeah, they're actually out right now, but you might see, here, I'll move my camera. I'll probably get more glitchy, but you can see I've got my Dalmatian down there. So
Hi, Purdy, she's busy.
World languages teachers are well represented here today, aren't they? That was my background before I came a tech coach. So.
Excellent. And let's see, did we hear from Kelly Hudson? We heard from Lisa Carroll. We heard from Jordan. We heard from. Those are the names I'm seeing on my screen. Did I miss anyone? I
think you've got everybody. I got one more I'm getting ready to admit. Ben says in the chat that he's a 5th grade science and social studies teacher at Custer Baker Intermediate School in Franklin.
Okay.
Excellent.
And Juan just joined us.
Okay. Juan, are you able to introduce yourself?
Maybe not yet.
Okay, very good.
Anyhow, yeah.
Anyhow, Nate, why don't we talk about the genesis of how we developed the book, and then maybe we could give like 5 or 6 of our top tips.
Yeah. So for those who haven't seen our book before, basically like so it's this book there. Yeah, there we go. It's behind me. It's that one. And that book was a combo between me and my mom. So this is my mom, by the way. We are not married. And another guy by the name of Matt Miller, who's a much better well-known author, and you know, much more out there in terms of prominent ed kind of circles. Anyways. So besides that, we decided that, man, like we just really needed, because my mom and I had been kind of talking and discussing about, like, you know, there's been so much, and this is back in 2017, I think we started coming up with this book. We were like, man, like there really needs to be a book that's been written about how you differentiate with technology in the classroom, because nobody's ever done something on that before. And we went to Matt with it, and we're like, yeah, we would love to combo, you know, with you on this. My mom and Matt had been following each other around in educational circles for a while, conference-wise, because they're both Spanish teachers or former Spanish teachers. And so, with that then, Matt made the book with us, and it became the 3rd book in the Ditch That series. So he's had another one, which was his first one, which was called Ditch That Textbook. The second one was Ditch That Homework, which he did with Alice Keeler, and then ours, which is Don't Ditch That Tech. And so now that's kind of where we arrived at this book, and it released in 2019, literally like, what, 6 months before the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden then everybody's like, oh my God, like ed tech is kind of like a thing that we all need to know and master. And so that it all of a sudden became much more relevant to a lot of people's lives than we, I guess, had ever imagined. So with that, that kind of brought us to then the book. Now, I know that some people said they were looking for very specific strategies and things like that. I'll kind of give you the lay of the land of how our book works. So the entire book is differentiated because since we're talking about differentiating with technology, we thought that that was something important that we actually do in the book itself. We use a few different archetypes in the book to help people understand how differentiation works with technology. And we decided actually to build our own model. And I will attempt to pull that up here in a second. So what we basically decided as we were making the book was that we really wanted to make our own model, as I mentioned there, for how people could use technology in the classroom, because we felt like there's stuff out there like, for example, you know, SAMR, right, is out there, but that's how students use technology in the classroom. So that's not exactly like super helpful for us as instructional, pedagogical professionals and teachers and admin and people like that. I mean, there's other stuff out there like the TPAC model, but I personally find TPAC to be really complicated and very convoluted. And there's not much practicality out of it that I think like somebody who's like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. My school just shut down. How do I all of a sudden like use technology to meet my students' needs? And so we felt like we needed something that was very practical and very useful for teachers to understand, but that was still grounded in good theory, such as things like UDL and Caroline Tomlinson's work on differentiation, as well as, basically like good solid learning theory, like, in the information processing model and other things like that. And so then the model that we came up with, and I will go ahead and share my screen so you guys can actually see this. This is from another presentation that we did, but I'll show you guys where you can find this on your own here in just a moment. So hopefully you guys can see all this. Let me know if you cannot. So this is what we came up with, and there's a survey at the very beginning of the book, and if you look there, kind of in the middle, those are those archetypes that I mentioned. And so at the very beginning of the book, we have people take a survey, and then they kind of understand how they tend to use technology in the classroom. It's not true in all circumstances, and none of these are necessarily better than one another. They're just kind of different in terms of how you are giving students control using tech in the classroom. And so then we kind of go through these levels, right? We have like a pilot, museum exhibitor, restaurant owner, council member, creative art coach. And the further you go down, the more student-centered the differentiation becomes. So you can see like a pilot, like teacher-led technology, that would be like something like what I'm doing right now, right? Where it's like, you can't, I mean, although here we have a very responsive session, right? We have very we have a very small session here. So if you guys want to talk about something different, we could totally do that. But like if you're standing up in front of your room and using a PowerPoint, that's a very teacher-led technology moment, right? A museum exhibitor is a little bit different. That's like the Kahoots of the world. So stuff that is interactive with your students, yet you're still the one who's deciding what you're exhibiting in the museum, if that makes sense, and how your students are interacting with the technology. The restaurant owner now, students are getting like a menu of options that they get to pick from. So for example, you might give students the option between an ed puzzle to watch a video, or they or they could use, what would be an alternative, Mom? I'm thinking like a Newsella article, right? Might be, two options there. And then we have the council member, where now students are starting to choose the content that they're personally interested in. And then the creative art coach, where the last one, we start talking about stuff like metacognition and reflective feedback and kind of very student-centric use of technology to help really meet our students' needs. So kind of the spawn of this, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff that's intersecting here, whether that's Tomlinson's framework or UDL or just good, solid teaching in terms of kind of moving away from that teacher-centric model in the classroom. And that was really kind of the point of this book. And then what we do in the rest of it is we actually then break the entire book out into how you can at each individual level use technology in these different ways. And that's kind of in summary, that's like the 3-minute spiel on what Don't Ditch That Tech is. Mom, I kind of dominated that. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think also for Kelly and Ben and Lisa, who were talking about modeling and working with other teachers, what we presented last week at the other Keep Indiana Learning Conference was the possibility that this might be a way in which we can encourage colleagues to integrate more technology in their classroom. Yeah. And not just that, but I know Jordan's heard me say this, but to turn the learning over to the learners and the work and the thinking over to the kids. And as you continue or traverse that continuum, then you see that the choice goes to the learners and it empowers the students. But it also means that the technology becomes, a tool for them to use as well.
Yeah. So
we had lots of conversations about that.
And Matt, Nate, do you want to our session? Go ahead, Mom.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to put that URL up, because they might as well have access? It looks like, from what I noted here, a number of you are working with other teachers, or maybe you're a peer to other teachers.
So the first link that I put there to Twitter, Matt did a sketch note of some of the big topics that we talked about, which is like, how can you create PD that is centered on good ed tech use with your staff. And that kind of hits some of the big points and things that we talk about, like stuff like with adult learning theory and things like that. And then the second point, the second link that it is posted there is the presentation that we did from that. Those of you who are saying that you work with teachers, Lisa, I think that you said you were, and Teresa, I think maybe both of you said that you were. Hopefully that is helpful there. And welcome, Colleen.
Hi, Colleen. I'm glad you could join us today. Colleen, would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us what your work is in schools?
Yes, I'm Colleen Tincher, and I teach Spanish grades 9 through 12 at Franklin County High School.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Oh, we like our Spanish teachers,
I know.
Right? And our world language teachers. This is amazing. Let's take a pause though, Nate, if we could, and see if we have questions from the group. What questions do you have?
As far as your model goes, I think when students come to the library, really their learning is already a little bit student-centered, because most of them come in, if they're doing research, they have, in most cases, chosen their subject or their content, and so they kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm.
And Teresa, are you finding in that, do they need to learn different ways to express what they've learned? I mean, how could we help you in your work?
You mean as far as a product that they have?
Mm-hmm.
Normally,
Processing.
Normally what happens is the classroom teacher has given them an assignment. So when they come in, they already know basically what their end product will be, or what as far as process, of course, they use informational texts and have a different way. They could either look through textbooks, or not textbooks, but our informational texts, as well as using their web searches.
And did you say that when they come into a library, are you do you work primarily in that setting?
Do I work primarily what? In that
You said
setting?
you said in a library. Do you primarily work in a library setting?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So
I mean,
I normally help students do their research, but of course we have a certain number of resources, and it's more or less set up where they're somewhat, I don't want to say restricted, but of course some of the information online is easier to access than others.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that, you know, as far as the student learning with your model there, that when they come in the library or the media center, that's pretty well already established.
Yeah, that sounds like it's pretty teacher. Is it? And I'm assuming it's already pretty much teacher set up at that point.
Well, from the classroom teacher, but I mean the students still, of course, you know, they more or less go ahead and try to find their information.
Yeah, I've had some fellow staff members who are, and my wife does this. She teaches 5th grade, and what she does is she has. Are you familiar with Flipgrid?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what she has the students do is when they finish a book, they create like a book trailer. And what they do then is they take that book trailer and they record it on Flipgrid, and then, you know, Flipgrid allows you to print off, you know, QR codes, right, of
Yes.
you know, if anything that's been made. And so then what she does is she takes the QR codes of those book trailers and then slaps them, you know, just, you know, pastes them inside the front cover or on the back cover. And then when students pick up a book, either, you know, it could be fiction or nonfiction, you know, they can get a review of it from a fellow student. She's found that to be particularly effective, both as an assessment tool and as like an exposure tool for getting students, you know, to hit new things.
That sounds very good.
Let me give another twist on that, if I could, Nathan. For the world language teachers, if the students want to do a spoken Flipgrid short or any Flipgrid, and you want to print out that QR code, that could be a prompt for stations in your world language classroom, where a student could go listen to another student's presentation or opinion and then provide a written or verbal response in any kind of format, right? They could answer questions on a form, they could provide their own Flipgrid short, but you could do lots of things with speaking and stations with Flipgrid in the modern language classroom. And in terms of differentiation, you could even, once they're recorded, think about which students were at what performance level in the language, and then have certain students visit those particular stations or put them in groups that way. So it's just another way to use Flipgrid for differentiation based on your student performance or student need. Nathan, do you want to talk about the Flipgrid communities, or do you want me to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, there are hundreds of Flipgrid communities on there. I'm linked to several. Flipgrid is there are a lot of teachers on it and a lot of users on it from across the world. So especially if you are teaching foreign languages, I would highly, highly recommend that if you do not have a Flipgrid account, you get one. It's free. It's very easy to use. But then there is basically, once you get your Flipgrid set up, there are communities of Flipgrid educators across the globe. And so if you want like a class, one of your classes to talk to another class, I mean, it could be in anywhere from Peru to, you know, Madrid, you know, and you know, have them, you know, practice English, or you practice Spanish, or vice versa, in a whole variety of ways. That can be a very powerful, effective learning medium that you can connect with those educators on there. It's pretty awesome.
So it's a Flipgrid Pals community, and the great thing about that is that you're connecting students, but it's teacher to teacher in the connection versus a student, you know, just going out cold on social media and privacy concerns and things.
Yeah,
it's a classroom to classroom connection, kind of like, you know, I'm aging myself, the old classroom pen pal days. So I would encourage you to look at Flipgrid, and they just launched some new, they're launching new features this week at ISTE. So you might check out Flipgrid too. Thank you, Teresa, for that comment. What other questions might you have? Or maybe there's like a technology question or a need or instructional need you have in your classroom where we could suggest an app or we could suggest a way to differentiate. We'll do our best off the tops of our heads. Okay, since we don't have any questions coming in, Nate, what do you think about pulling up some resources for different searches?
Yes.
And we have quite a few grade levels, developmental levels represented here, right? All the way from late elementary or middle school through high school.
What I was thinking about bringing up was if you're trying to point your teachers to like very quick bite-size things that like very kind of, you know, I find that bite-size PD is pretty effective. I'll go ahead and paste these here in the chat. So the first is our remote learning app vent calendar that we did for this past year. These tend to be very popular. And we get several, several thousand people who visit these a year. And the one that we did this year was on basically apps that you can use for remote learning. So there's Jamboard, you know, Vooks, Radio Garden. There's going to be some on there you've heard of and some of you probably haven't. And then when you click on the presentation itself, like, so for example, if you were to click on Edpuzzle, right? Or if you were to click on, you know, Insert Learning, which is the IL one, it will actually show you some tips and tricks to use with that, as well as provide you a link to the site and some other recommendations that we give on using it for remote learning. I'm going to as well skip a little bit down here. And I'm going to post, this is to another app vent calendar that we did. And this one was specifically on differentiation. So this is from the previous year. This is from 2019. And this is, again, everyone is a different app and ways to actually differentiate with it. So there's stuff on here that some of our personal favorites like ClassTime, Tween Tribune from the Smithsonian, Pear Deck, which is pretty well known, but then some other ones that aren't super well known. So for example, IORAD is on there, right, and a few others. So if you're looking for maybe apps that you've tried or haven't heard of, and you're looking like, oh, what can be some specific things that I can do with that? I would go ahead and recommend that those are good places to start. The other place that I would recommend to everybody here, so these, and I'll go ahead and put this link at this is the last one. So this is a sign up for our mailing list. And the mailing list, what this does is it sends you 4 free ebooks that we've written since we did Don't Ditch That Tech. So it gives you, first of all, 15 custom recommended apps from Don't Ditch That Tech. So it kind of has you do the same thing that we do in the book, gives you that survey at the beginning, and then it recommends some appetizers for you. And then the next ebook was this First Time Techie Teacher's Guide to a Digital World. So if you have staff that is either very tech hesitant or staff that is new to ed tech, such as, you know, for example, like beginning teachers, that ebook is particularly helpful. I've done a lot with students podcasting in the classroom. So there's an ebook on that that shows you some of the research and practical guides that I've done with that before. And then the last one was an ebook that I wrote with another author named Stacy Roshan. She's out on the East Coast. And we put that together like in February of 2020, right when I started to notice that schools were shutting down kind of in Europe and places like that. I was like, oh man, like we should start to put together something on this. And so we did one on asynchronous remote and flipped classroom resources that's there. And it's in its second edition now. Maybe someday we'll go back and we'll add a third edition there. I'm not sure. So anyways, that is also there. There you just simply put in an email, you put in a name, and it signs you up for it, and then it sends them to you as soon as you're ready. And then we have somebody new here, Jessica, I think I saw.
Hi, Jessica. If you have a second, can you tell us what where you're teaching or what your work is in education?
I think it says that she's still joining, so she might not be in here just yet. But I see, yeah, I don't see her in here at the moment, but I saw her jump into the waiting room.
We do have a 2 o'clock session today where we will go through 5 to 10 to 15 different instructional technologies and how you use them for differentiation. So we would invite you to come back at 2 p.m. where we go through those details.
Yeah, it still says she's joining you. She just might have a slow connection, but
Okay.
What other questions can we answer for you guys? We've given you some resources and things, but we really want to know what you guys, have a need for, have questions about, or struggles that you might be having. As much as, we could sit here and dump resources on you, I'm sure that's not super fun.
How about what areas, where are your need areas for differentiation in your classrooms? Do you have particular areas where you wish you had more support or some ideas?
I'll jump in. I mean, I know I'm the host, but as a coach, like for me, what I find is being able to send our tech hesitant teachers to resources that will help them start that process of differentiation with the technology, because they feel it's so daunting and it's so overwhelming to them. And so finding little nuggets that I can send them to based on what they teach or maybe what their strengths are. And so that, I know that's a very broad thing I just threw out there, but.
We normally recommend a couple of things. Oh, go ahead, Mom. You're fine.
No, go on. I just wondered, Nathan, if we wouldn't want to pull up the differentiation AppNet calendar and just show kind of how we walk educators through an app, because that might be an easy entry point. But go ahead, Nathan, you had another idea.
I mean, normally a couple of things. So first of all, if you are trying to convince staff to use a tool, and that's your starting point, like if you're going tool first, that's generally the opposite of what we recommend starting with. And the reason is because most, at least according to most research that I've read, is that if you try, and this is true for anybody, Diana, like not just your school or your staff in particular, is that when you give or you try to convince somebody of something, odds are is that you're going to actually have the opposite reaction. Many times that they're going to, become defensive, or they're, not going to accept it and be like, well, I don't, you're trying to make me do something I don't need, that I don't have a need for. Right.
Absolutely.
And so where we really recommend people come from is a few different angles and kind of think about it backwards. We recommend that they think about the need that you have to solve in your classroom, which is like, basically if teachers can see like, oh, okay, I'm solving a real world problem that I have here, right? Like I can't get actionable data that I can utilize with my students right away, right? Like I'm really having trouble doing very quick formative assessments. Like I can't figure out how to do that. Like I'm trying to use Canvas for it. And Canvas, like I'll just be straight up, because I've used Canvas before and I've now used Schoology as well. Like Canvas and Schoology, LMSs are not the ways to do quick assessments with your kids. They're not fast, right? And so then like then that's, if they can see the need and they can start there, that's where you start with these really small, very slow, especially peer recommended apps or strategies that they can use. Because oftentimes when stuff comes top down, that's also less effective than a teacher down the hall saying, oh, hey, by the way, have you heard about this thing I've used? Like, it takes me 5 minutes and it's really quick and it solved this problem that I had with my kids, right? So like this is one where like this is from our Advent calendar. It's called ClassTime, right? So like, and if you look over at the GIFs that are over on the right, like you can, if I was doing a very quick formative assessment with somebody, like this would be the one that I would point people to, right? Now, again, this is a very specific circumstance. You know, maybe, you know, you could also then, so like, oh, okay, I noticed that you're using a lot of PowerPoints. Maybe we should use Nearpod or Pear Deck then, right? For getting those quick assessments done with kids. But the more that it's bottom up, if that makes sense, the better results you're going to have, especially when you do these very small like exposures. The biggest thing that I've seen, like when PD goes really, really bad with like, okay, guys, we're all going to use this new app and it's a kind of a flavor of the month thing where like it gets introduced and you're like, oh yeah, everybody, we're going to start using this and it's going to be great. And then like you never hear anything about it 4 months down the line. And there's been very little support that's been provided and it's all been top down, that I've found typically tends to have disastrous results. If that kind of makes sense. What else would you like to add to that, Mom?
I would like to add, you might think about trying it out, like colleague to colleague. I remember the first time someone at UND introduced Flipgrid, we all just took about 5 or 6 minutes in a meeting and we created a little Flipgrid introduction, and it just made you feel like, okay, everybody's figuring this out together. And then we talked about how we could use it in our classes. So it was very organic. So you might try that as well. I do it, but it's always very intimidating to try a new app first in front of my students. It's almost always that way. Sometimes Regina Scott, our administrative assistant, volunteers to be my student because I tend to use a lot of instructional technologies in my courses, but just having that peer-to-peer support I think is helpful as well. One of the things that you'll see in our presentation that I reposted in the chat there is kind of the principles of adult learning, that adults like to have. Problem-based learning is really powerful for adults because they, you know, it's powerful for them to learn if there's a problem to be solved. I want to go back to ClassTime though, if I could, Nate,
you're breaking
because
up, Mom.
I've used really powerful. Oh,
can you repeat that one more time?
I've just felt like ClassTime is incredibly powerful. It's powerful for teaching teachers how to use data, because you can see in our slide there that's coming up, you get their responses immediately and you can do a quick data analysis.
Yeah. And this is also like, I mean, we're kind of more here speaking to, you know, like how you talk about things with your staff, right? But it's also important, like, and this is true of any app, not just this one, about how you introduce it with students. Like, if you're going to all of a sudden use like Schoology or, I mean, it could be anything, you know, Class Dojo or Bunsy or anything like that, you need to, or ClassTime, you know, it goes on Flipgrid. The first time that students play around with an app, it needs to be play. It cannot be you trying to, like, for example, like let's say you're assessing, like doing like a ClassTime assessment right here, and I'm going to assess students like on this, and it's the first time they're using it. Odds are I'm probably not assessing the content of what they've learned. I'm probably going to get a lot of data discrepancy on them simply not knowing how the app works, right? So like, don't try to teach content and process. Like, don't make both of them new at the same time. So like if you're gonna have like new content, you need to use that with an old process that students have used. Or if you're gonna have a new process that students are gonna hit, you need to do that with old content. And then you can't do both, is what I've typically found, because that gets overwhelming for students.
Okay, Nate, Diana made a really good comment that the challenge is trying to stay on top of what's new to get reluctant tech users to find something that solves their problem or meets their needs. So I mean, there's a few things, Diana, that I would suggest. One is certainly you're welcome to look at our page, Teaching from the Ridge, as those different calendars have, like with the one we're showing for ClassTime, have a really short description that could get you and your colleagues started. The other one that I would recommend is Matt Miller's site, Ditch That Textbook. He has many great presentations. That's his full-time work. So he spends a lot of time putting together materials too. Here's another.
You can also ask your teachers what they're using too.
Yeah, if you have a survey.
We rely a lot on our teacher leaders in our district, but they still look to me to like help guide them to new things. And so I'm always on Twitter and doing things like that. I was just hoping to open some discussion for some of the other teachers that maybe are coaching. Yeah. As well.
There's always, so this is where like I have to be careful with this stuff, where like I also am in a position where I'm also looking for tools that are out there, right? But there's these people out there who I'm sure that you can think of, like as soon as you hop on Twitter, that they're like, oh, by the way, look at this new cool thing you can do inside Google Sheets, and like. And they almost become like more obsessed with the features or the apps themselves rather than like what's best for your students. So I always caution people, like when looking for stuff out there, which again, like absolutely do it, but like think about like what is, like what is the best possible thing for my kids in their particular circumstances, and not like this new cool, like, so for example, like there's some teachers out there, they are obsessed with Adobe Spark, which, don't get me wrong, is totally fine. But I have some educators that I know that I'm connected with, that they like, it doesn't matter what the suggestion is. They're like, Adobe Spark has to be the answer. Adobe Spark has to be the answer. And I don't know if that's, and I would be pretty hesitant to always say like, well, if you put all your eggs in that basket, like there's a bunch of complications with that. Like one, like not all students learn the same. So that's a bit of an issue. Two, these apps do sometimes disappear, right? And so like all of a sudden you'll have these moments, and this happened a lot this last year, where like all of a sudden all these new tech companies came out. They're like, hey, by the way, like because everybody's going to remote learning, we're making this completely free for you to use. And then 6 months they turn around and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, if you want to keep using this, it's $180 a student. And you're like, oh no. Right. So I'm always cautious, like with new tech tools, and because I mean, there's so much stuff that goes into it, right? Like COPA and FERPA. Like how does your district have any particular rules of its own that fall into finding new tools that are out there?
Oh, that's a huge one, is that the teachers will hear about something and be so excited about it, but they don't think about COPA. They don't think about FERPA. They don't think about some of those things. And I just hear something that's engaging for their students.
Yeah, exactly. And we were at a presentation last week, and there were a couple people presenting on proper use of technology in the classroom.
Privacy issues. It was great.
And privacy issues. And they did a really good job, but they showed like, people tweeting pictures of their class on Zoom with their first and last name of their students and their cameras.
Oh, yikes.
Like out on Twitter. And like, I mean, that's so many privacy violations that I can't even count that, right? Like that's just not acceptable and it's not okay.
Right.
So like, it's also worth having a conversation to your teachers. Like, okay, yes, you might like, and I'm sure you do have this conversation with teachers as well, but like, as much as we love like finding new tools that are like awesome and neat and they're really engaging, it's also like very important that we take a moment and we step back and we reflect on things. Another presentation that we did last week was from a gal named Victoria Thompson, and she does a lot of work about how does anti-bias, anti-racist education factor into how we use ed tech apps. And so like, for example, there's some apps out there that exist that I will not throw under the bus here, but like they don't have representative samples inside the work that they provide, right? Like it's very, you know, Eurocentric, white-centric things that are there, which is okay, like to a point, but there becomes a moment where like students aren't seeing themselves represented in the ed tech apps that you're using. And that's also a really big problem. So
Yes.
as much as like we would, you know, say like, yes, like check out the tools and, you know, find something for your teachers that works. It's like, you know, doing that is a very big step, right?
It is, absolutely. Hey, we have a question in the Whova chat
Yes.
from Ben. He says, my staff has had a positive response to Blookit this year. They especially liked it because it has multiple modes for the same question set. Would there be any forms of differentiation that are similar?
What's the app called, you said?
Blookit.
Blookit. I haven't heard of that one. Let me see.
And Ben, can you tell us again what the I'm not seeing the Wova chat, what the differentiation form is that you like in that?
He
Like
said they like it because it has multiple modes for the same question set.
Okay,
I'll put his comment in the chat, in the Zoom chat.
I can help clarify that because we started using Blookit a lot at Plainfield this year. And basically you build like kind of a Quizlet set, and then you can play multiple game modes off of it. Like there's a kind of treasure swap game. There's a answer the most questions in a short amount of time game. There's one where you build a cafe or a factory.
Yeah.
Like the kids would go insane whenever we got to play Blookit, and it was so fun. So I think Ben is asking like how, I guess, is there anything that would be more differentiatable in that same kind of spectrum, and it's free.
Yes, I know. Okay, I know exactly what this is because I saw this a while ago, and it looks super. Yeah, it does look super engaging.
I would play with my students, and I would get so competitive that like I would be partying along with them. So
the big thing that I would encourage Ben to think about is to think about this app in context, right? What are we using this? First of all, like let's think about like what are we using this app to achieve, right? So it looks like, for me and everything that I've seen out of it, it's an assessment and perhaps like a rehearsal kind of app, right? And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have created the game, right? Something to think about here is that you have already defined the answers, right? Students know the answers that they're supposed to find here on the app, correct? Right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so if that's the case, then just kind of like recognizing, number one, this is an interactive app, right? Which is great because that students love to play with it. But in a way, you've kind of already decided the content that your students are going to be working with. So at this point, that probably is the next step of where to go, is to, and again, this kind of takes like a moment of letting go, right? Control. Although you're giving students certainly like an option of the different ways they can play, kind of that like restaurant owner that we talked about. And it's kind of got that museum exhibitor feel to it as well. I would say the next step of where this goes is to students deciding, or at least choosing to interact with some of the content that they have in the classroom. What would you say, Mom?
So it sounds like the differentiation you have in that is the process in which they express their answer, right?
Or just they interact with it, right?
So are you wanting to use the same app and have further differentiation, or use that app as part of like a suite of apps, perhaps?
So like what I'm kind of, for example, like what I'm kind of thinking about, Ben, is like something like Wonderopolis, right? Where, okay, yeah, it's a suite of apps. Okay, perfect. So like Wonderopolis, if you haven't checked that one out, is it wonderopolis.org?
I thought it was .com.
I'm not sure. Let me go check.
Let's see, Ben, you were upper elementary, intermediate. Wonderopolis would be great for your students, a developmental level.
And the reason why, like I say, Ben, that and again, like as part of like a suite of things, I mean, unless there's like some COPA FERPA thing you're worried about, or some kind of issue there. I mean, I think it's perfectly fine to use, right? It's just getting your students to the point where eventually, for example, like let's say they here's another way that you could differentiate this, right? Like let's say that they do one of these games, right? And they play it, they interact with it for, let's say, 15-20 minutes. Are students then taking a moment afterwards to reflect and process their learning, right? To do some metacognitive activities. So you can say like, something that I struggled with on this game was blank, right? Or I noticed I did well on blank, like when we played. So like even like having like, young ones, second grade all the way through, 6th, 7th grade, and then especially in high school where metacognition becomes really, really important, is like having students take time to be like, okay, I played that, but what did I learn from it? Right. That would also be kind of a next step that you could take with that thing.
Okay, so let me go a step further, Nate. If you were to use this kind of reflective prompt, Ben, or any other teacher, you might want to think about 2 or 3 levels of prompts. And we have these in our book, but I can give you a couple of examples. So when we think about sentence stems or prompts, think about tying that to Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge. Some of your students at the 5th grade level are going to be ready developmentally for higher order thinking. They're going to be able to synthesize, they're going to be able to create, they can take that content. So one question coming out of your booklet experience might be, I learned that blank. It was easy because, it was challenging because. That's a very low level fill in the blank, and that's where some of our kiddos might be at age 10 or 11, right? The next prompt that you might give to other students would be, or just ask them to choose their prompt or challenge them to choose a prompt, might be something about, describe the easiest thing for you in today's game. That's more open-ended, right? Describe the most challenging thing for you in today's game and why. Then an even deeper level of thinking would be, put this concept, that concept, and that concept together, and how do they relate? So your reflection coming out of that might have 3 different levels of responses based on your kids' readiness. And then as they share out, that provides the other kiddos with scaffolding about how different levels of thinking work. And you don't have to ever say that.
And one way that I found to make that easier is you can intentionally limit the number of student devices that are allowed in the classroom, like when you play. So you force students to partner up and like play in like a group of 2 or a group of 3. And then when they have those discussions, they can process them with a peer first before they share out their answer.
And you can do that intentionally. Nate has a great strategy. Do you want to talk about the quads, Nathan, that you do? And you don't have to say any names. Where you quad pair, you put the kids in quads. You used to do this with their reading level.
Oh, yeah. So I would group students, but they wouldn't know it, using different readings. So like stuff like Tween Tribune or things like that, or Newsella. It's kind of like Newsella if you're familiar with that. And then when I would assess students, they wouldn't have any knowledge that, that they had been grouped that way, because everybody in their group had the same reading. So that it's kind of like a similar strategy to that, if that kind of makes sense. It's just you're having students process together rather than do it individually.
Does that help a little bit, Ben? With some ideas?
I have a question about using the reflection on the Blookit or the game or whatever as maybe an exit ticket. Is there an easy app you guys have found to like send those prompts to different groups of kids? Because I'm a big Google Forms user, and I didn't know if you have found an easy way to, I guess, organize those on a daily basis. Because if kids shift readiness, then you have to be able to like almost on the fly send different exit tickets to different kids. And so like my brain just started almost glitching out trying to decide the easiest way to do that. So I didn't know if you have multiple types of reflections, what's the best way to get it to the right kids?
I typically will use ClassTime, and what ClassTime does, so why I would recommend this one is that, so ClassTime it's similar to like a Socrative or things like that. No, ClassTime's free. They do have a paid version, but you can use the free version and you'll be fine. ClassTime, what I do with it and why I like it, is because I can take a question set that I just made, and I can click on it and I can copy and paste it, and then I can make a few like modifications to that one. Like I could add a YouTube video to the question. I could add a word bank. I could, I could change the questions around, limit the amount of options, right? I could do anything. And it takes me probably less than 5 minutes to do that. And then I can just, basically what it does is it either generates like a very quick, 4-letter or 5-letter code that any student devices can access, or it does a QR code, which is great for littles when they, because like trying to have really small ones type in, the correct letters. And then what happens is I can have those different groups of students scan the different QR codes, and that might take me maybe tops 5-6 minutes once I've practiced, like making a copy and then making some changes and then sending it out.
So you would, on that day, would you say, okay, like would kids know they're in group A, B, or C, and then they would know, or like I guess, would you sit there and say Johnny and Susan and blah blah blah, you scan A? Like how would you make it, I guess, more private that they're getting a different question set?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that I can do it. So do you use Google Classroom, Jordan?
Yes.
Okay, so Google Classroom automatically allows you to send different things to different students, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I would do is I would just send, like, because you can send them the URL and it auto logs them in so they don't have to type anything at all. And then when you send it to them, they don't know that they're clicking on a different link than the one to their peers, right? Like nobody pays that close of attention. So that's what I would do. And so that way nothing is like publicly displayed up. You don't have to tell this student that they're doing something different than the peer next to them. You just say, go to your Google Classroom and please take, the Google, just, click on the link that I sent you. And that's all you have to say. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. I've used ClassTime now for like, I think like 4 or 5 years. And I've never had any issues with it doing stuff like that. So I would recommend it.
That's a great question, Jordan. Thank you for that question. What other questions might you have before I think we close out here in a few minutes?
Yeah. I think, is this end at 12 or do we have more time?
Technically it ends at 12, but I think
Okay.
we have a little bit of leeway because I don't think there's not concurrent sessions.
Okay. Well, if there are no questions, I will give a plug, since this is a pet project of mine that I'm working on right now. It is the sequel to that book, kind of. The spiritual successor, I don't know. So if you want to discover more, I will type it in here in the chat if you want to sign up for like updates for it. So there's well, you got to do HTTP. Let's go backslash. Let's see if that works. Did I do it? Okay, I think I did it. So if you want to sign up for updates to that book, well, the successor kind of, that's kind of something I'm working on right now. So.
Thanks,
All right.
Colleen.
Well, if nobody has any other questions and you guys are finished, I just have a couple little business things to talk about, and then we will be wrapping it up for the day. Oh, gotta find my notes here on this time.
Yeah.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm definitely a lover of learning and always trying to stay up on anything ed tech and differentiation. And so thank you everybody that joined us today. And if you want to refer back to this session later, that it was recorded, and within about 48 hours, it should be on the Whova app. So you could come back and check it out, follow up, share it with other people from your district that might be registered but couldn't attend this session. Don't forget to go in and do the end of session review, which will then prompt your PGP certificates. Our presenters, they shared their contact information with Twitter. I put it in the Whova app too. So check out their website, follow them on Twitter, and stay connected. And I think we are good to go. So you can have a great day at the conference and see what other kind of learning you can go and find.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diana.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, Diana.